There's a moment in every Muslim's financial journey when everything changes. One day you're checking your Wahed account or your screened brokerage statement and feeling like you're barely making progress, and then suddenly you wake up and your halal investments are generating more in dividends and price appreciation than some of your cousins are making at their actual jobs. It's not magic, it's mathematics, and there are 3 specific net worth milestones inside the halal frame where this transformation happens so dramatically that your wealth building shifts into overdrive. My name is Omar, and I spend an embarrassing amount of time thinking about compound returns inside Sharia screen portfolios and why so many practicing Muslims never seem to break free from living paycheck to paycheck. If you're tired of watching your savings grow at the speed of continental drift and you actually want to understand when your halal net worth starts working harder than you do, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Now, before we dive into these 3 game-changing tipping points, let me ask you something. When you think about building Muslim wealth, what comes to mind? Maybe you picture some doctor uncle who got into real estate in 1998 and now owns half the strip malls in town, or someone who inherited a family business. But here's what might surprise you. Muslims who actually build substantial wealth aren't necessarily the ones earning the most. They're the ones who understand something that sounds almost too simple to be true. Your net worth doesn't grow in a straight line. It grows like a snowball rolling down a mountain, starting slow and then accelerating until it becomes an unstoppable force. There are 3 specific points on that mountain where the snowball picks up so much momentum that everything changes. These aren't random numbers I pulled out of thin air. These are mathematically proven thresholds where compound growth on screened equities stops being theoretical and starts being life-changing. The first tipping point happens at $100,000. The second occurs around $650,000. And the third milestone that completely transforms your relationship with money hits at $1 million. Most people think reaching $100,000 means you're 10% of the way to becoming a millionaire. They're completely wrong. This misunderstanding is exactly why so many people in our community give up before they ever see the real momentum kick in. Let me paint you a picture. Most people think wealth building is a perfectly predictable linear process. Save $10,000, you're $10,000 closer. Save $50,000, you're $50,000 closer. Makes sense. Except it's completely backwards from how money actually works when you invest it properly inside a halal frame. Money doesn't sit there doing nothing when it's invested correctly in screened equities. It earns dividends, it grows in price appreciation, and those returns start earning their own returns. This isn't a get-rich-quick scheme or a financial fairy tale. This is basic mathematics that has been creating wealthy families for generations, yet somehow most Muslims either don't understand it or don't believe it actually applies to them inside the halal frame. The secret lies in compound returns, which Albert Einstein supposedly called the 8th wonder of the world. Now, whether Einstein actually said that is debatable, but the sentiment is correct. Sharia screened equity portfolios have historically tracked the broader market within a fairly tight spread once you exclude conventional financials and clearly haram industries. Those who build halal wealth understand this and stop letting the rapper convince them that their compounding will be dramatically different than the market average. Let me show you exactly how this works with real numbers. Imagine you decide to invest $500 a month into a Wahed account or a self-directed IRA holding HLAL, SPUS, and individual Zoya screened stocks. That's roughly $125 a week. Not chump change, but not impossible for most working Muslim adults. Roughly the cost of one halal restaurant outing a week, or the streaming and subscription bloat we covered in another video. Assuming your screen portfolio earns an average return of 7% annually, which is conservative compared to historical performance, here's where things get interesting. It takes approximately 7 years and 9 months of consistent monthly contributions to reach your first $100,000. 7 years and 9 months might sound forever, especially when you're starting out, but think about it this way. 7 years ago, were you the same person you are today? Time passes whether you're building wealth or not. During those first 7 to 8 years, most of the money in your account comes directly from your own contributions. You're doing the heavy lifting while compound returns are still warming up on the bench. Out of that $100,000, roughly $46,000 comes from your contributions and $54,000 from screened equity returns. Not bad for money sitting there working for you, but admittedly, it's not life-changing yet. There's also a Muslim-specific layer here. Once your zakatable wealth above debts crosses the silver-based nisab, which in 2026 sits around $1,495 per SAPA-USA and the American Muslim Community Foundation, and stays there for one full lunar year, you owe 2.5% in zakat annually. So along the path to $100,000, you've also been giving zakat each Ramadan on whatever was zakatable in that account at the close of your lunar year. That zakat outflow does shave a bit off your compounding, but it does something else more important. It builds the habit of treating wealth as partly belonging to others, which is exactly the discipline that separates US Muslims who steward wealth responsibly from those who lose it to riba debt and consumption traps. Here's where most people make a critical mistake. They look at those numbers, think the process is too slow, get discouraged because the returns don't seem impressive enough, and quit. What they don't realize is that they've just completed the hardest part of the journey. They've built the foundation that supports everything that comes next, like learning an instrument. The beginning is frustrating. Once you reach competency, improvement accelerates dramatically. Remember, we're trying to get to $1 million and you've just hit $100,000. In traditional thinking, you'd assume you're 1/10 of the way there. Compound returns don't work that way. From this point forward, your money starts working much harder for you. Those screened equity returns that seem modest during the first 8 years begin to snowball in ways that will genuinely surprise you. The reason this works is that compound returns are exponential, not linear. Each dollar of growth generates its own future growth, creating a snowball effect that accelerates over time. It's like pushing a boulder up a hill. The beginning is brutal and exhausting, but once you reach the top and the boulder starts rolling downhill, momentum takes over and you basically just stay out of the way. The brothers in our community who hit $100,000 in screened wealth and stay disciplined are the ones who quietly become the doctor uncles and the property uncles 2 decades later. The ones who quit at $40,000 because the progress felt too slow are the ones who never get there. The next milestone is $200,000. And here's the kicker. It only takes about 5 more years to get there. Let me repeat. It took nearly 8 years to go from $0 to $100,000, but only 5 additional years to double that amount. We're now 13 years into your journey, and you're sitting at $200,000. Of that $200,000, you've personally contributed roughly $78,000 through your monthly investments. The other $122,000 is pure screened equity growth. Your portfolio has been quietly working in the background, earning returns on returns, and suddenly those gains are becoming substantial. Even though you've reached only $200,000, you're actually much closer to becoming a millionaire than the number suggests. By the time you hit the 18-year mark, you've reached $400,000. Your contributions total about $108,000, but your account balance shows $400,000. Nearly 3/4 came from compound growth rather than your own savings. You're now earning roughly $28,000 a year just from screened equity returns and dividends. Remember how long it took to accumulate your first $100,000? Now you're generating more than 1/4 of that amount annually without lifting a finger. The beautiful part is that this doesn't require you to live like a hermit or skip every halal restaurant outing. We're talking $500 a month, which for many US Muslim households is what's currently going to subscriptions, takeout, and impulse purchases anyway. The acceleration becomes even more dramatic as you move past $400,000. By year 22, you're looking at $600,000, and this brings us to our second major tipping point. $650,000 in productive halal assets represents something most people in our community never truly understand until they experience it firsthand. Here's why this milestone matters. The median US household earns about $78,000 a year, with $650,000 invested in a screen portfolio earning 8% annually. You generate $52,000 in passive income, substantial passive income that can dramatically supplement or partially replace your work income. Now here's the halal specific piece. Some of that yield comes from dividends on screened equities, which is structurally permissible because it represents a share of real corporate profit, not interest. Some comes from sukuk yields, which are profit-sharing or asset-backed structures explicitly designed under AAOIFI standards to be permissible. Some comes from price appreciation. None of it relies on conventional bond interest or savings account riba. For the average US Muslim household, reaching $650,000 in screened investments represents a major psychological breakthrough. Suddenly they realize they're generating significant halal passive income that can supplement or partially replace their work income. They can still work if they want to, use their salary to accelerate wealth building, watch their net worth keep growing. It's like having your cake and eating it too, except the cake keeps getting bigger while you're eating it. This is where most US Muslims start to breathe a little easier. The fear of financial ruin doesn't vanish, but it shrinks dramatically when you realize you can generate $40,000 to $50,000 a year in passive halal income. Suddenly losing a job becomes an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. Getting sick doesn't mean financial devastation. You have options that simply don't exist for the brother living paycheck to paycheck. There's something else that happens at this level that's more important than the financial security. Your relationship with risk changes. With substantial halal assets working for you, you can afford to take calculated risks. Maybe you've always wanted to start a halal-aligned business, but were too afraid to give up your steady paycheck. With your screened portfolio covering a meaningful share of expenses, you can take that leap. Maybe you want to study Islamic studies or take a sabbatical to memorize Quran. With your money working for you, you're not postponing it. Maybe you want to perform Hajj this year for both you and a parent without raiding the rest of your portfolio. With $650,000 working in screened assets, that's a manageable withdrawal that doesn't derail your trajectory. Maybe you want to send your kids to a full-time Islamic school instead of public plus Sunday school because you can finally afford it. Maybe you want to take a year off W-2 work to memorize Quran or volunteer at the masjid full-time, supplementing your portfolio yield with community work that compounds in Akhira while your dunya capital keeps compounding in your screened account. None of these decisions are accessible to the brother living paycheck to paycheck. No matter how much barakah he prays for, they become accessible when the math gets to a certain threshold, and the math gets to that threshold through consistent screened equity investing over time. This is what real Muslim wealth looks like. Nothing to do with the auntie network or showing off at the masjid parking lot. It's about choices, about being able to say no to things that don't serve your deen and yes to the things that do, about designing your life according to your values rather than your bank account. Some of you are wondering about inflation. Fair question, and it's built into the strategy if you execute correctly. If you're generating 8 to 9% annual returns on screened equities and only living off 6 to 7% of your portfolio's value each year, the remainder helps your investments keep pace with inflation. Plus, there's something most people forget: Social Security. The average benefit is around $1,900 a month. Social Security is funded through general taxation, so receiving it isn't a riba issue. Combined with halal passive income from your portfolio, you're looking at a comfortable lifestyle. Now let me tell you what happens when you finally cross the 7-figure threshold, because this is where things get genuinely mind-bending. Your first $1 million in screened wealth doesn't just represent a number, it represents a complete psychological transformation most US Muslims can't fully understand until they experience it firsthand. When you hit that milestone, which happens around year 29 of consistent investing at $500 a month with 7% returns, something shifts in your brain. You feel relief first. Finally, all those years of brown bagging halal lunch and driving used cars have actually amounted to something tangible. You won't necessarily feel rich, especially with inflation making $1 million feel more like what $500,000 used to, but you will feel validated. You'll realize that building halal wealth isn't just for the doctor uncles or the families with old country property. As a regular professional with a regular salary, you've proven that the system works inside the deen if you have the discipline to stick with it. Here's what's fascinating. Your first halal million gives you a massive psychological unlock. You start seeing possibilities everywhere. Maybe you've always wanted to angel invest in halal startups, but never had the capital. Now you do. Maybe you've dreamed of buying rental property in cash to skip the halal mortgage debate entirely. Now your net worth opens that door. Maybe you've wanted to fund a new wing of the masjid or a permanent waqf endowment in your family's name. Now those are real conversations. The fear of financial catastrophe doesn't disappear, but it shrinks to manageable levels. You can generate $40,000 to $50,000 a year in halal passive income, which means even if everything else goes wrong, you're not eating cat food in your golden years and you're not late on zakat. Some folks get comfortable after hitting 7 figures and basically coast. They've achieved what they thought was impossible, so they ease up on the discipline that got them there. Big mistake. The people who understand wealth building at a deeper level realize that reaching your first halal million is like graduating from college. Huge accomplishment. Also just the beginning of what becomes possible. From here, the mathematics become absolutely ridiculous in your favor. You only need your portfolio to grow by 50% to hit $1.5 million. That can happen in just a few years with proper market conditions. To reach $2 million, you needed to double, which historically happens every 7 to 10 years on screened equities. The jump from $2 million to $3 million only requires a 50% increase. From $3 to $4 million, just 33%. Each subsequent million becomes easier if you maintain the discipline that got you there. This is where wealthy Muslims start thinking differently about money and time and start thinking seriously about faraid. At $1 million and growing, the inheritance you'll one day pass on becomes substantial. The Quranic shares for spouses, parents, children, and other relatives are mathematical and specific. Most US Muslims do not structure their accounts intentionally for clean faraid distribution. They leave 401ks with outdated beneficiaries, taxable brokerages without name transfer on death designations, and properties is titled in ways that conflict with the inheritance ratios specified in the Quran. The brother who reaches $1 million and hasn't done that planning is leaving a mess for his heirs. The brother who reaches $1 million and has done it is leaving his family a barakah-aligned transition. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Nick, this all sounds great in theory, but what about market crashes? Legitimate concern. Diversification across screen sectors and conservative withdrawal rates matter. Here's the thing about market downturns. If you're consistently investing for decades, market crashes actually help you build wealth faster. When prices drop, your monthly contributions buy more shares of HLAL, SPUS, and individual screened equities. When the market recovers, and historically it always has, those extra shares become incredibly valuable. So there you have it. 3 tipping points that transform your halal net worth from a slow crawl to an unstoppable force. $100,000 when compound returns finally wake up and start pulling their weight. $650,000 when your screened portfolio can generate substantial halal passive income that changes your financial security. And $1 million when you realize you've quietly built generational Fari distributable Muslim wealth that most people in our community don't even know is possible. As always, the math is the math. The scholarly views on specific products and contracts genuinely differ, and your final ruling on any specific halal vehicle has to come from a scholar you trust who knows your situation. The math doesn't lie, even if it requires more patience than our microwave society typically appreciates. Start investing consistently today, screen ruthlessly, pay your zakat every Ramadan, and 29 years from now, you'll either be thanking yourself or wondering what could have been.